the bank manager's face drained of color. His hands shook as he reached for the phone. "Lock the front doors," he told his assistant, then called the police immediately. He stared at me as if I had handed him a live explosive, not my late grandfather's old passbook. The same passbook my mother had thrown into the trash just the day before, calling it useless junk that should have been buried with him. She was convinced it meant nothing. As it turns out, some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some of them bite back. But I'm moving too fast. Let me begin at the start. My name is Danica Gross. I'm 31 years old, and until that morning, I believed the most dramatic part of my week would be arguing with my landlord about the broken radiator in my apartment. I work as a paralegal at a small law firm in Columbus, Ohio. It's not glamorous. The pay is average. My car is 12 years old and makes a noise like a wounded animal whenever I turn left. Still, I'm good at my job because I pay attention. I notice details. I ask questions. I don't stop until I get answers. My family has always treated this as a flaw. The funeral was held on a Tuesday. My grandfather, Eugene Gross, died at the age of 89. He lived on a modest farm about 2 hours outside the city, the kind of place with a wraparound porch and fields stretching as far as you could see. Everyone assumed he had nothing, just an old man in an old house, spending his final years quietly. That was certainly the story my mother wanted people to accept. The service was small, efficient, and cold, exactly Miriam's style. My mother has always believed emotions signal weakness, and funerals were no exception. She organized everything like a corporate meeting. 30 minutes for the ceremony, 45 minutes for the reception, then everyone leaves. No lingering, no excessive emotion. The catering came from a place that clearly believed mayonnaise qualified as a food group. My grandmother would have stood up from her grave just to criticize the potato salad. She had standards. Miriam did not. My brother Wyatt arrived 40 minutes late, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He claimed parking was difficult. The farmhouse has a gravel lot the size of a football field. But sure, parking. He didn't look especially sad. Then again, Wyatt has never been skilled at emotions unless they benefit him directly. He hugged our mother, shook a few hands, and spent most of the reception checking his phone, likely tracking his investments. Wyatt loves discussing his investments. I stood off to the side, watching my family perform grief like a rehearsed play, and I thought about my grandfather. Eugene Gross was an accountant for 40 years. Numbers were his language. He could look at a spreadsheet and see patterns and stories others missed. He was also a strong chess player. He taught me when I was 7, sitting on that wraparound porch with a board between us and glasses of lemonade, both of us sweating in the summer heat. He used to say chess wasn't about the pieces you took. It was about positioning, patience, and waiting for your opponent to make a mistake. His favorite line was, "The truth is patient. It can wait longer than any lie." I didn't understand it then. I do now. 2 weeks before he died, I visited him at the farmhouse. He was frail. His body was giving out, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He grabbed my hand with unexpected strength and pulled me close. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet every word was intentional. "The passbook," he said. "In my study, the chess book. Only you, Danica, promise me." I promised, even though I didn't fully understand what he meant. After the funeral, the family gathered at the farmhouse. Miriam immediately began walking through the rooms, talking about selling the property, discussing potential buyers, calculating square footage as if the body wasn't even cold. Wyatt nodded along, occasionally adding suggestions. It was clear they had discussed this already, probably while my grandfather was still alive. I slipped away to his study. It was a small room lined with bookshelves that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. Grandpa hadn't smoked in 20 years, but the scent lingered. I found the chess book right away. Strategic Endgame, a master's guide. His favorite. We had gone over the positions in that book countless times. I pulled it from the shelf, and it felt wrong, heavier than it should have been. I opened it, and my chest tightened. The pages had been hollowed out. Inside was an old leather passbook, worn at the edges, the kind you might see in an antique shop. It looked like it belonged to another era. I carried it into the living room, curious and ready to share what I had found. That was my mistake. Miriam noticed it before I could speak. Her reaction was instant. Too fast, too precise. She crossed the room in 3 steps, grabbed it from my hands, barely glanced at it, and tossed it straight into the kitchen trash. "This is garbage," she said. "Old accounts that don't even exist anymore. It should have stayed buried with him. Don't dig through his things, Danica. It's inappropriate." Wyatt laughed from the couch. "Always the sentimental one, aren't you, Danny?" They exchanged a look. Quick, almost invisible. But I saw it. I've spent 8 years working in a law firm. I've seen that look before. It's the look shared by people who hold the same secret when they're afraid someone is getting too close to something they want hidden. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying my mother's reaction. If the passbook was worthless, why was she angry instead of dismissive? Why did she feel the need to throw it away so quickly, so decisively? And I kept thinking about my grandfather, his sharp eyes, his careful words. He was an accountant for 40 years. He didn't make mistakes with documents or numbers. If he hid that passbook inside a chess book and told only me about it, there was a reason. People usually respond with anger only when they're hiding something. At 5 o'clock that morning, I made a choice. I was going back to the farmhouse. That passbook was still in the trash, and I needed to understand why my mother was so determined to keep it buried. Before we go on, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I notice everything. Thank you for the support. The drive to the farmhouse took 2 hours under the dull gray light before sunrise. I left the radio off. I needed the silence to think. My grandfather was many things. Patient, precise, deliberate. He spent 40 years as an accountant, tracking numbers, spotting inconsistencies, and documenting everything. He played chess like someone who could see 15 moves ahead. He didn't act at random. He didn't hide past books in hollowed-out books or whisper-coded instructions without a reason. And my mother didn't throw things away with that level of force unless fear was involved. I arrived just as the first light broke over the fields. The sky was streaked with purple and gold. No other cars. No one nearby. Perfect. I let myself in using the spare key Grandpa kept under the third porch step. The house was silent, still, almost tense. I went straight to the kitchen. The trash can was exactly where I'd left it. I pulled out the bag, set it on the floor, and started digging. There I was, a grown woman with a college degree, elbow deep in garbage at 5:30 in the morning, like a raccoon dressed for an office job. My grandfather would have approved. My therapist would have had concerns. The passbook was near the bottom, under coffee grounds and paper napkins from the funeral reception. I pulled it out, wiped it on my sleeve, and looked at it closely for the first time. The leather cover was old and worn, designed to look decades out of date. But when I opened it, something didn't add up. The account number didn't match the antique appearance. The format was wrong. Too many digits. Too modern. Then I found the note. Folded tightly into the spine of the passbook was a small piece of paper written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Account number 774122289. They don't know about this one. Ask for the full history. Trust no one in the family. Only you, Danica. I read it 3 times. They don't know. Meaning Miriam. Meaning Wyatt. My grandfather had hidden something from his own family and trusted only me to uncover it. I took photos of everything. The passbook, the note, the account number, and uploaded them to cloud storage immediately. Working at a law firm teaches you habits like that. Documents can disappear, files can be destroyed, digital backups last. I drove home with the passbook in my bag and questions racing through my mind. The first call came at 10 in the morning. Miriam. Her voice was warm, gentle, concerned. Everything it usually isn't. She said she was just checking on me after yesterday, saying how hard the day had been for all of us. I waited. I knew there was more. Then she asked if I had taken anything from the farmhouse. Everything belonged to the estate now, she said, and needed to be cataloged properly before the sale. I lied easily. I told her I'd only taken one of Grandpa's chess books for sentimental reasons. There was a pause. I could hear her calculating, deciding whether to push. Then her tone softened. That was fine, she said, but I shouldn't go through his things anymore. Some things were better left alone. She added that Grandpa hadn't been well, that his mind had been failing in recent years, that he didn't always know what was real. I said nothing. Inside, I was shouting. 2 weeks earlier, my grandfather had looked directly at me and given clear, specific instructions. The passbook. The chess book. Only me. That wasn't confusion. That was intent. That was a man executing a plan. The second call came at 7 that evening. Wyatt. My brother, who hadn't contacted me voluntarily in 6 months, suddenly wanted to talk. Wyatt checking in on me was about as natural as a cat offering to manage your finances. The last time he called me unprompted was 3 years earlier, to ask if I still had Dad's golf clubs. I did. He took them. I never got them back. Patterns like that are hard to miss. He sounded relaxed, almost friendly. He said Mom mentioned I'd been asking about Grandpa's belongings and wanted to make sure I was okay. I told him I was fine, just processing. He made sympathetic noises, then carefully shifted the conversation. He said Grandpa didn't really have much, just the farmhouse and some furniture. He and Mom had already talked. She would handle the sale, and he'd take care of the property side. I didn't need to worry about anything. There it was. They had already divided everything. Miriam would get the money. Wyatt would get the property. Danica would get nothing. They assumed I'd accept it. They assumed I wouldn't ask questions. His final advice was to let it go, reminding me how Mom gets and saying it wasn't worth the conflict. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment and thought about the timing. Miriam called at 10 in the morning. Wyatt called at 7 that night. 9 hours apart. Almost coordinated. Almost like they were checking what I knew, aligning their stories, making sure their version stayed intact. They weren't acting out of confidence. They were afraid of something. This is exactly why I keep records of everything. Every conversation, every date, every detail. Working at a law firm teaches you that memories fade, but documents last. I wrote down both calls word for word, time, length, exact phrasing. I looked again at the passbook, at my grandfather's note, at the account number that didn't match the aged leather cover. The next day, I took a personal day. I was going to that bank. I was going to find out what my grandfather had hidden, and whatever my mother was so determined to keep buried, I intended to bring it into the open. I requested the day off, and my boss approved it with almost no questions. One advantage of never taking time off is that no one pushes back when you finally do. The drive to the bank took 2 hours. First Regional Savings had been absorbed by a larger institution years earlier, but the main branch still operated in a small town called Millbrook. It was the kind of place with a single traffic light and a diner that likely hadn't changed its coffee since 1972. I walked into the bank at 9:15 a.m., carrying the passbook, my ID, my grandfather's death certificate, and paperwork proving my relationship to him. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a few $100s in a forgotten account. Maybe just some clarity. The young teller smiled as I approached. She took the passbook, looked it over with polite interest, and entered the account number into her computer. Her expression changed. She excused herself, made a call in the back, and spoke quietly, out of earshot. 20 minutes passed. I sat in the lobby watching the clock, starting to feel foolish. Maybe Miriam was right. Maybe this meant nothing. Maybe I had driven 2 hours for an empty account and no answers. I sat there long enough to learn the security guard's entire life story. His name was Carl. He was training for a 5K. His wife had banned bread from his diet. I have never seen someone look so defeated while standing 3 feet away from a bowl of free mints. Eventually, a man in an expensive suit appeared. He was tall, gray at the temples, with a carefully neutral expression. He introduced himself as Theodore Calloway, the regional manager, and asked me to follow him to his office. His hands trembled slightly as he took the passbook from me. He examined it as if it were dangerous, then sat heavily in his leather chair and exhaled. "Miss Gross," he said carefully, "this account is flagged in our system." My stomach dropped. That word never leads to good news. He quickly clarified that it wasn't because of anything I had done, but because of the account's history. Despite what the old passbook suggested, the account wasn't opened in 1962. It was opened in 2010. My grandfather had intentionally used the vintage cover to conceal it. The account was a savings instrument with compound interest and had remained untouched for 14 years. He wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. $2,147,832. When I saw it, I made a sound I can only describe as what happens when you sit on a cat by accident. Part gasp, part yelp, part urgent need to lie down. The manager offered me water. I needed something stronger. $2 million. My grandfather, who everyone believed had nothing, who lived simply and wore the same sweaters for decades, had hidden $2 million in an account no one knew existed. But Theodore Calloway wasn't relieved. His expression grew more tense. There was more. In 2015, someone had attempted to access the account using power of attorney documents for Eugene Gross. The paperwork included what appeared to be my grandfather's signature authorizing a transfer, but the bank's verification system flagged inconsistencies. The signatures didn't fully match their records. Access was denied, and the attempt was logged by security. My mouth went dry. I asked who it was, already knowing the answer. Calloway checked his notes. The person listed was Miriam Gross. He paused and asked if she was a relative. She was my mother. My mother had tried to take this money 9 years earlier. She failed, but she tried. More calls followed. More people arrived, a woman from security, a man from legal. They pulled archived records from their institution and from other banks where my grandfather held accounts. What emerged was overwhelming. My grandfather had money, a significant inheritance from his own parents in 1995, carefully invested and grown over time. By 2009, when my father died and Miriam became Eugene's caretaker, he had accumulated more than $1 million across multiple accounts. Miriam found them. Over 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, she drained those accounts piece by piece, transfer by transfer, withdrawal by withdrawal, using power of attorney documents and signatures that appeared legitimate but were not. In total, she stole approximately $1.5 million from my grandfather. But Eugene Gross was an accountant. He noticed. He couldn't stop her legally because she had convinced the courts he was mentally incompetent. He couldn't go to the police because no one believed a confused elderly man over his devoted daughter-in-law. He was trapped. So he did the only thing left to him. He hid what remained. In 2010, once he understood what was happening, he quietly opened this account, transferred $1 million into it, disguised it with an old passbook cover, and told no one. That account became his lifeline, his safeguard, his final move in a long chess match against the woman who had taken everything else from him. Calloway looked at me with something close to respect. "There's one more thing you should know," he said. In 2019, my grandfather filed a formal complaint with the bank's fraud department. He reported that his daughter-in-law was stealing from him. He explained that no one would believe him because he had been declared mentally incompetent. Calloway paused. Without the original account documentation, without proof that there were assets she was never meant to access, the bank couldn't move forward. He held up the passbook. My grandfather had been trying to prove he was being robbed, and now I had brought them the evidence he couldn't provide while he was alive. I sat in that leather chair holding my late grandfather's secret, and everything became clear. Eugene hadn't given up. He hadn't surrendered to confusion or despair. He had spent 9 years building a case, gathering proof, and waiting for the right moment. He left the final step with the one person he trusted to complete what he started, me. Calloway reached for his phone. "Miss Gross," he said, "I need to contact our security division, and will likely have to involve law enforcement. This account is evidence of serious financial crimes." I nodded. I had walked in expecting very little, maybe a small balance, maybe some closure. Instead, I found $2 million and confirmation that my mother was a thief. Somewhere, I was certain my grandfather was smiling. If you're still following this story, thank you sincerely. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means more than I can say, and I promise the most important part of this story is still ahead. The police arrived at the bank within 2 hours of Calloway's call. 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Division stepped in, notebooks in hand, wearing expressions that suggested this wasn't new to them. They called it elder financial abuse, one of the fastest-growing crimes in the country, with family members almost always responsible. The lead detective was Tabitha Jefferson, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, direct. She had spent 15 years in financial crimes. She told me something I haven't forgotten. "These cases break my heart," she said, "because the victims are trapped. They depend on the people stealing from them. They care about the people harming them, and when they speak up, no one believes them." She looked at the passbook in my hands and said my grandfather fought back the only way he could, with records, with proof, with patience. After that, the investigation moved quickly. Callaway turned over the bank's records. The 2015 access attempt was fully documented. The forged signatures, the fraudulent power of attorney, the internal security flags that stopped the transfer. Everything was preserved in the bank's digital archives, intact and detailed. But that was only the start. 3 days after my visit to the bank, I received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the line was elderly but steady. He introduced himself as Lawrence Whitmore, an attorney, 75 years old, and a friend of Eugene Gross for more than 40 years. He said my grandfather had left him clear instructions. If Eugene died, Whitmore was to contact me and only me. No one else in the family. He was explicit about that. I drove to Whitmore's office that afternoon. It was a small practice in a quiet area, the kind of place with wooden shelves and framed diplomas from decades earlier. Whitmore greeted me at the door. He was tall, slightly bent with age, but his handshake was firm and his eyes were kind. He told me he and Eugene had played chess together for 40 years and called my grandfather the most methodical man he'd ever known. When Eugene came to him in 2020 and explained what was happening, Whitmore believed him immediately. Eugene didn't make accusations lightly, and he never came unprepared. He led me into his office and placed a thick folder on the desk between us. "Your grandfather spent 4 years putting this together," he said. He knew no one would believe him while he was alive, so he prepared for what would come after. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside the folder was everything. Copies of the forged power of attorney documents sat beside examples of my grandfather's genuine signature. The differences were small, but unmistakable. Once you knew what to examine, the loops were too precise, the pressure too consistent. My mother had traced his signature, likely using documents she could access. She did it well enough to convince most people, but not well enough to pass a bank's verification system, and not well enough to fool an accountant who had spent 40 years identifying inconsistencies. There were bank statements and transaction records, along with a detailed log in my grandfather's handwriting. He had recorded every questionable withdrawal, every transfer he hadn't approved, every explanation my mother used to hide what she was doing, dates, amounts, account numbers. 4 years of careful documentation. At the bottom of the folder, sealed in an envelope, was a notarized sworn statement dated 2022. I read it slowly, hearing my grandfather's voice in my head with each line. He described everything. How Miriam took control of his finances after his son died in 2009. How she convinced doctors he was developing dementia when he wasn't. How she isolated him, controlling his calls, his visitors, and his access to information. How she stole from him, methodically for years, while presenting herself as his devoted caretaker. His final words in the statement struck hard. "I am of sound mind. I know exactly what I am doing. I am leaving this evidence to my granddaughter Danica because she is the only one who will do what is right. She has always asked the questions others were afraid to ask. I trust her to finish what I could not." I sat in that office and cried, not out of sadness, but from something harder to define. Pride, perhaps, mixed with grief for all the years he had spent alone, knowing the truth, and unable to make anyone believe him. The next day, Detective Jefferson called with more information, and this time it wasn't about my mother. They had been tracing where the stolen money went after it left my grandfather's accounts. What they found involved my brother, Wyatt, the golden child, with his expensive suits, investment talk, and quiet confidence that he was superior to everyone else. He didn't just receive money from our mother. He created a shell company, Garrett Holdings LLC, registered under his middle name. Over $600,000 was funneled through that company over 5 years. He wasn't an innocent recipient. He was an active participant. My brother who told me to let it go. My brother who mocked me for being sentimental. He helped my mother steal from our grandfather and built his lifestyle on the proceeds. His house, his car, his investments. Everything rested on stolen money concealed behind corporate paperwork and family deception. But the findings didn't stop there. Jefferson's team ran background checks on everyone involved. Standard procedure, she said, and uncovered something from my mother's past that clarified everything. In 2002, Miriam's own mother died, leaving around $200,000 in savings. When the estate was settled, almost nothing remained. Other relatives had suspected wrongdoing at the time, but there was no proof. The money had simply disappeared. My mother had done this before. She had taken from her own mother 20 years before she did it to Eugene, and my grandfather knew. That was why he never trusted her. That was why he was so cautious, so deliberate, so prepared. He recognized the pattern. He understood what she was capable of, and he spent his final years making sure she wouldn't succeed again. Detective Jefferson asked me to cooperate fully with the investigation. That meant staying silent, not warning my mother, not confronting my brother, attending family dinners, and acting as though everything was normal while the case was built around them. 2 weeks of pretending. 2 weeks of sitting across from people who had taken from my grandfather. They smiled at his funeral and split his estate like scavengers circling what was left. Sunday dinner at my mother's house was unbearable. My mother's chicken has always been a failure in the kitchen, but that night it felt fitting. I was forcing down proof of poor choices while facing a woman whose entire life was built on them. Miriam talked about selling the farmhouse. She had located a buyer, a solid offer, a fast close. Wyatt nodded along and mentioned a new investment he was eager about. They were confident, fully convinced they had escaped consequences. After dinner, Miriam pulled me aside. Her voice was gentle, worried, maternal, an act she had perfected. She said we didn't always agree, but we were family. My grandfather, she added, would want us united and supporting one another. I kept my expression calm. Of course, Mom. Family comes first. For 2 weeks, I had to act as if I didn't know my mother was effectively a white-collar criminal. Every time she called to complain about a neighbor's lawn or rising grocery prices, I wanted to respond, "You know what's expensive, Mom? Federal prison." Instead, I waited. I kept records. I trusted the process. My grandfather taught me chess when I was 7. His favorite lesson was that the best move isn't always the obvious one. Sometimes you give up a piece to win. He had sacrificed his final years building this trap. He knew he wouldn't see it close, but he trusted that I would. The call came on a Thursday morning. Detective Jefferson sounded calm and professional. She said they were executing the warrants that day and that arrests would happen at the same time. She thought I should know. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat quietly for a while. My mother was about to lose everything. My brother was about to learn that betrayal has consequences. My grandfather's patience was finally about to pay off. The arrest took place at 7 in the morning, precisely coordinated. There was no warning, no chance for them to speak to each other, align stories, or destroy records. Jefferson had planned it carefully. I wasn't present, but she shared the details later, and I admit there was a certain satisfaction in hearing them. My mother answered the door in her bathrobe, coffee in hand. When she saw the badges and uniforms, her composure slipped for a brief second. I imagine it was the look of someone watching her world fall apart in slow motion. Detective Jefferson presented the warrant and read the charges: fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, theft. My mother tried one last attempt at control. Her voice stayed steady and reasonable, the same tone she had used to escape trouble for years. She said it was a misunderstanding. She claimed her father-in-law was mentally unstable and didn't know what he was saying, and that she had only been trying to protect him. Jefferson was unmoved. She explained they had 4 years of documented evidence, a notarized sworn statement witnessed by an attorney, bank records showing attempted access to an unknown account, and a clear trail tracing where the money went. This wasn't an error, she said. It was accountability. My mother was handcuffed and led to the police car. There was no yelling, no spectacle, just the quiet end of a lie that had lasted 15 years. At the same time across town, my brother was in his office, sitting in a meeting with clients when officers entered. I was told he went completely pale. He tried to say there had been a mix-up and mentioned his lawyer. The officers didn't engage. Wyatt was cuffed in front of his coworkers. His reputation ended in that moment. Whatever he had built, whatever image he had crafted, it vanished. An arrest for money laundering in your own conference room doesn't fade away. Over the following months, the case moved through the courts. I attended several hearings, watched the evidence accumulate, and saw my mother's confidence slowly dissolve as the scope of the prosecution became clear. Her attorney tried every angle, arguing that Eugene was mentally incompetent and that his statement couldn't be trusted. The prosecution brought in 3 doctors who had examined my grandfather over the years. All testified that Eugene showed no signs of dementia. He was alert, coherent, and fully aware. The incompetency ruling, they explained, had been based on false information supplied by Miriam herself. She had convinced the courts that her father-in-law was losing his mind, so no one would believe him when he accused her of stealing. The judge showed no sympathy. Wyatt's lawyer took another route. He approached me privately with an offer. Wyatt would testify against our mother in exchange for a lighter sentence. He claimed he had been manipulated, that he didn't understand the full extent of what was happening, and that he was a victim as well. The attorney conveyed Wyatt's message with care. Your brother says he wants to set things right. He's prepared to cooperate fully. I considered it for exactly 3 seconds. Tell my brother that our grandfather taught me chess, I said. And in chess, you don't bargain with pawns. It turned out to be irrelevant. The prosecutors had no interest in Wyatt's cooperation. The shell company proved he wasn't a passive beneficiary of family funds. He had set up corporate structures to conceal stolen money. He signed paperwork. He authorized transfers. He knew where the money came from and helped hide it. No agreement. Full charges moved forward. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold February day, 3 months after the arrests. The federal courthouse had wood-paneled walls and an American flag behind the judge's bench. Before sentencing, the prosecutor requested to read a statement from the victim, Eugene. The room fell silent as his words were read aloud. He said his daughter-in-law stole his money and his dignity, convinced everyone he was losing his mind while draining his savings. He stated clearly that he was not confused, that he understood exactly what was being done, and that he left a record so the truth would eventually surface. I watched my mother as the statement filled the room. She stared forward without expression, but her hands trembled. Wyatt wouldn't look at me. He seemed smaller, diminished. The confident brother who had always looked down on me was gone, replaced by a man who had staked everything on a lie and lost. The judge delivered the sentences. 7 years in federal prison, no possibility of early parole, full restitution ordered. Everything she owned would be liquidated and returned to the estate. 3 years in federal prison, a felony conviction that would follow him for life. His investment career, his professional standing, the image he had built so carefully, none of it survived. Sitting there, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, not satisfaction, but a quiet sense of closure, like a story finally reaching its final page. After the hearing, Detective Jefferson found me in the hallway. She said my grandfather would be proud, that he had fought for years, and I finished it. I thanked her, shook her hand, and walked out into the cold February air. Later, Wyatt's lawyer called again and asked whether I would consider visiting my brother in prison. He said Wyatt wanted to apologize, to explain. I said I would think about it. I'm still thinking. It's been 6 months, and I'll probably keep thinking. Some apologies arrive too late. Some explanations don't need to be heard. My phone buzzed with a message from Lawrence Whitmore, my grandfather's attorney. He said my grandfather left something else for me, one final item, and told me to come by when I was ready. One more surprise, one more move from beyond the grave. Eugene wasn't finished yet. I visited Whitmore's office 2 days after sentencing. The wind was sharp, but the sun was bright, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Whitmore greeted me with tea and a single envelope on his desk, my name written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. He explained that Eugene was very specific about timing. He wanted me to read it only after everything was resolved. The envelope felt light, just paper, but I knew it carried weight. Before I opened it, Whitmore outlined the legal outcome. The $2.1 million hidden account now belonged to me. Eugene's will, held safely for years, named me as the sole beneficiary. My mother and brother were explicitly excluded, with documentation explaining why. The restitution process had begun as well. Assets seized from Miriam and Wyatt would be liquidated and added to the estate. The proceeds from the farmhouse sale, which my mother planned to keep, would come to me. The total inheritance, once finalized, would be around $2.5 million. I nodded, but the money felt distant. What mattered was inside the envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside were 2 pages written front and back in my grandfather's hand, dated 1 month before his death. He addressed me directly, saying that if I was reading it, I had found the passbook and followed the trail, just as he knew I would. He explained why he chose me. He said my brother was always his mother's son, shaped by her values, willing to take shortcuts and justify the outcome. He said hope is not a strategy, and an accountant knows better than to rely on it. He wrote that my mother never loved him, only what he represented: security, respectability, access. After my father died, she saw an opportunity and believed he was an easy target. She was wrong. He explained that he recognized what she was doing almost from the start. After 40 years as an accountant, he knew how to track numbers and identify fraud. But she had legal authority and convinced everyone he was losing his mind. When he tried to resist, she tightened control. When he tried to speak, she silenced him. So he documented, prepared, and waited. The truth, he wrote, is patient. It can outlast any lie. He hid what he could, built the evidence, left instructions with Lawrence, and trusted me to finish what he began. He wrote that I was different. I visited because I wanted to, not because I expected something. I played chess for the game, not the inheritance. I asked questions that made my mother uncomfortable and never accepted easy answers. That was why he chose me. He apologized for the burden he left me and for the pain it would cause, but said he knew I was strong enough to carry it. He told me to live well, to use the money for something meaningful, to build something lasting, and to be happy. He ended by thanking me for being the granddaughter he always hoped for. I sat in Whitmore's office and let the tears come. They weren't tears of sadness, but something deeper, something like healing. My grandfather had truly seen me. In a family where I often felt like an outsider, he recognized something real and trusted me with what mattered most. Not just money, but justice. That was 6 months ago. I left my job at the law firm, paid off my debts, and bought a small downtown building, a narrow storefront with large windows and good light. I opened a bookshop, the kind with comfortable chairs, the smell of coffee, and shelves full of stories waiting to be found. I named it Gross Pages, a name my grandfather would have appreciated. In the back corner, there's a chess table, 2 chairs, and a board always set and ready. Sometimes customers play. Sometimes I join them. Above the table hangs a framed photo of my grandfather, and beside it, in a simple wooden frame, his favorite words: "The truth is patient. It can wait longer than any lie." My mother writes letters from prison sometimes, long, rambling messages full of blame, excuses, and demands for forgiveness. She says, I betrayed the family. She says, I ruined everything. She says I owe her. I don't respond. Some doors once closed stay closed. Wyatt's wife divorced him. His friends vanished. When he gets out of prison, he'll carry a felony record and nothing to show for all those years of so-called success. The people who once had everything by taking it now have nothing. And me? I have a bookshop. I have peace. I have the knowledge that my grandfather spent his final years fighting for justice, and I was the one who delivered it. Thank you for watching. More of my most gripping stories are waiting on your screen. Click one now. You won't want to miss the best part. You'll love it.